The Sterling-Whitmore family's idea of subtle humiliation had always been painfully obvious. As waiters circulated through the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel with silver trays of champagne and canapés, my twins sat at a far corner table, their dinner served on disposable plates that looked garish against the crisp white tablecloths. "Mom," Emma whispered, her 14-year-old dignity struggling to remain intact. Everyone's staring. Her brother Ethan just pushed his food around with a plastic fork, his shoulders hunched under the weight of being a perpetual outsider in his own family. At the main table, their cousins Charlotte and Madison preened over their Wedgwood Place settings, occasionally shooting smug glances our way. "Darling," Victoria Sterling-Whitmore's voice carried across the room as she approached our table, champagne flute in hand. "Surely you understand, we couldn't possibly have enough place settings for everyone. These arrangements are so much more practical for the extended family." Extended family, that's what they called us ever since I married James, Victoria's youngest son. The scholarship girl who'd caught the eye of Boston's banking heir, a fairy tale that turned sour the moment they discovered my father was Michael Chen, the brilliant but difficult software engineer who'd once worked for Sterling Technologies. "Of course, Victoria," I smiled, touching the USB drive in my clutch. "Practicality is important when managing family resources." She paused, something in my tone making her perfectly Botox forehead attempt to wrinkle. "Yes, well, do try to keep the children from making too much noise. This is an important evening for Charles and me. 25 years of marriage, and more importantly to Victoria, 25 years of ruling over the Sterling-Whitmore financial empire. An empire built on stolen code and broken promises." "Speaking of important evenings," I said casually, "did you know my father kept meticulous records of all his work? Even after Sterling Technologies fired him." The champagne flute trembled slightly in her manicured grip. "I don't see how that's relevant to our celebration." "Oh, but it is." I pulled out my phone, showing her an email preview. "Especially since the SEC is very interested in the original ownership patents for the trading algorithm that made your family billions." "Sarah." My husband James appeared beside his mother, his face tight with concern. "What are you doing?" I looked at my children, seeing echoes of my father in their features, the same determination, the same quiet dignity in the face of prejudice. "I'm finally honoring your grandfather's legacy." Victoria's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Whatever you think you know." "I know everything," I cut her off. "Every line of code my father wrote, every meeting he had with Charles, every promise your husband made and broke. And most importantly, I know exactly how you structured the theft through offshore accounts." James grabbed my arm. "These are serious accusations." "They're not accusations, James, they're facts. Facts that the forensic accountants have spent the last year verifying." Across the ballroom, Charles Sterling-Whitmore stood to make his anniversary speech, unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to shatter. He clinked his crystal glass, drawing everyone's attention. 25 years ago, he began, I made the best decision of my life, both personally and professionally." "You mean when you decided to steal my father's life's work?" I said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Or when you drove him to suicide by destroying his reputation?" The room fell silent. Victoria's face went pale beneath her expensive makeup. "Mom?" Emma's voice wavered. "What are you talking about?" I squeezed my daughter's hand. "I'm talking about why we really use paper plates, sweetheart. Not because there aren't enough place settings, but because 16 years ago, your grandfather created something brilliant. Something that would have changed the financial world. And instead of paying him for it, the Sterling-Whitmores stole it, destroyed him, and built their fortune on his genius." Charles abandoned his speech and strode toward our table. "This is hardly the time or place." Actually, Howard Chen stepped out from behind a pillar, his lawyer's briefcase in hand. "This is exactly the time and place. Hello, Uncle Charles. Remember me? Michael's nephew, the SEC investigator." Victoria swayed on her Louboutins. "Howard, but you've been handling our compliance for years." "Yes," he smiled grimly, "following every electronic trail, documenting every hidden transaction, building an airtight case for justice." The other guests were openly staring now, smartphones recording the unfolding drama. At the main table, Charlotte and Madison's perfect plates sat forgotten as chaos erupted around them. "You can't prove anything," Charles snarled, but his confidence was cracking. I pulled out the USB drive. Actually, we can prove everything. My father may have died broken, but he left me the key to a safety deposit box. Inside was every original document, every piece of code, every email between you and your offshore partners. He knew that someday someone would need to know the truth. James looked between his parents and me, realization dawning in his eyes. The algorithm, the one that made our family name in electronic trading, was written by Michael Chen, Howard confirmed. Your father just put his name on it after driving my uncle to death. Victoria's champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound seemed to break some spell in the room, and suddenly, everyone was talking at once. The children, Victoria hissed, gesturing frantically at the growing crowd of onlookers. Think of what this will do to the children. I looked at my twins, seeing 16 years of calculated slights and orchestrated humiliations reflected in their eyes. I am thinking of the children. All of them. Including the ones you've taught to believe that cruelty is their birthright. Charlotte and Madison had crept closer, their designer dresses rustling as they tried to comprehend their perfect world crumbling. Their mother, Regina, clutched their shoulders protectively as if scandal were contagious. Whatever Michael Chen may have contributed, Charles tried to regain control. His CEO voice booming across the ballroom. Sterling Technologies legally owned all intellectual property developed during his employment. Howard pulled out a document. Except he developed the core algorithm before joining your company. The timestamps on his original code prove it. You saw its potential, hired him to steal it, then fired him when he refused to sign over the rights. Is that why grandfather killed himself? Ethan's quiet question cut through the chaos. Because they stole his work? The pain in my son's voice made me reach for his hand. Yes, sweetheart. The night before he died, he sent me an email with encrypted files. I was too young then to understand what they meant, but he knew someday we would need them. This is absurd, Victoria snapped. Charles, do something. But Charles was staring at another figure who had just entered the ballroom. Sterling-Whitmore, his elderly father and chairman emeritus of Sterling Technologies, moved slowly toward our table. It's true, the old man's voice quavered. All of it. I watched Charles do it, and I said nothing. Michael Chen was a genius, and we destroyed him for profit. Victoria whirled on her father-in-law. Bernard, you're confused. I'm dying, he cut her off, not confused. The cancer's left me with maybe months, and I won't take this sin to my grave. James sank into a chair, his world visibly tilting on its axis. Dad, is this true? Charles's face had gone from red to ashen. Father, you don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Bernard pulled out an envelope. This is my sworn testimony about everything that happened. How we systematically stole Michael's work, how we orchestrated his professional destruction, how we celebrated when we heard about his suicide. The whispers around us grew louder. Phones continued recording as Boston's elite witnessed the implosion of one of its most prominent families. What do you want? Victoria's voice had lost its society polish, revealing the desperation beneath. Money? A position on the board? I want justice, I said simply. I want my children to know their grandfather was a brilliant man who died protecting his principles. I want your children to understand that real worth isn't measured in China patterns or trust funds. Howard opened his briefcase. The SEC investigation is complete. Combined with Bernard's testimony and the original documentation, you're looking at securities fraud, intellectual property theft, and criminal conspiracy charges. You'll destroy everything, Charles growled. Thousands of jobs, charitable foundations, our entire legacy. Your legacy? I laughed bitterly. You mean my father's legacy, the one you stole and twisted into this monument to greed and prejudice? Emma stood up, her paper plate forgotten. Is that why you always treated us differently? Because you knew you'd stolen from our family? Victoria flinched at the directness of the question. For once, her social conditioning failed her. The company will be placed in receivership, Howard explained, his professional tone at odds with the family drama unfolding. All assets frozen pending criminal investigation. Though I suspect the civil suits from shareholders will be equally devastating. And the trusts? Regina demanded, pulling her daughters closer. Surely the children's trusts are protected. All assets derived from stolen intellectual property are subject to seizure, Howard confirmed, including the trust funds. The room erupted again as other parents realized their children's futures were suddenly less certain. The sterling spoons and Wegwood china now seemed to mock them, symbols of privilege built on theft. Bernard Whitmore shuffled closer to my children. "I should have spoken up years ago," he said softly. "Your grandfather was a good man. Better than any of us." "Security," Charles bellowed, finally breaking. "Remove these people." "Actually," Howard smiled thinly, "the FBI agents by the door are here for you, Uncle Charles. And Aunt Victoria. Conspiracy charges don't look good on a society resume." As federal agents moved through the crowd, I watched my children witness justice unfold. The paper plates that had marked them as outsiders now seemed like badges of honor, proof they had never been part of this elegant fraud. James caught my eye across the chaos, and I saw something shift in his expression. Understanding, perhaps, or awakening. He'd always chosen the path of least resistance, letting his parents' prejudices go unchallenged, but now he had to choose. "I'll tell them everything," Bernard announced loudly as Charles and Victoria were led away. "Every detail, every meeting, every dollar stolen from Michael Chen's legacy." It's time the truth came out. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of what had once been Sterling Technologies, now renamed Chen Innovations. The portrait of my father, once hidden in storage for decades, now hung prominently at the entrance, his gentle smile and keen eyes welcoming visitors to the company that should have been his all along. The settlement had been comprehensive. With Bernard's testimony and the mountain of evidence Howard had gathered, the SEC case was irrefutable. Charles and Victoria took a plea deal, their social empire crumbling as they faced house arrest and massive fines. The company was restructured, with the original algorithm's ownership finally credited to its true creator. "Mom," Emma called from the conference room, "the scholarship committee is ready." I smiled, walking into the room where my children sat on the board of the Michael Chen Foundation for Technology Education. The paper plates that had once marked them as outsiders were now framed in the foundation's office, a reminder of how privilege and prejudice had tried and failed to diminish them. James had surprised everyone by becoming one of the foundation's strongest advocates. After his parents' arrest, he'd thrown himself into learning about his father-in-law's work, finally understanding the brilliance that his family had stolen. "The first round of scholarships goes out today," Ethan announced proudly. 10 full rides to MIT for students from underprivileged backgrounds, just like grandfather would have wanted. Charlotte and Madison sat quietly at the end of the table, their designer clothes replaced by simple business attire. After their trust funds were seized, Regina had finally been forced to teach her daughters the value of work. Now they interned at the foundation, learning lessons about merit and justice their parents had failed to instill. "Bernard would have loved to see this," James said softly, joining us at the table. The old man had passed away 6 months ago, but not before recording hours of testimony about the company's transformation and his hopes for redemption. "The Chen algorithm's latest application just got FDA approval," Howard announced, walking in with a stack of papers. "The medical modeling software your father dreamed of creating is finally helping design personalized cancer treatments." I touched the locket containing my father's picture. He always said technology should serve humanity, not just profit margins. The scholarship recipients would be arriving soon, bright young minds who would never have to eat off paper plates or feel less worthy because of their backgrounds. The company that had once represented exclusion and theft now stood for opportunity and justice. Grandmother sent another letter, Emma mentioned carefully, from the rehabilitation center. Victoria's court-mandated therapy had revealed decades of her own trauma and prejudice passed down through generations of privilege. Her letters, initially bitter, had slowly transformed into genuine attempts to understand the damage she caused. She asked if she could attend the scholarship ceremony, James added, not as a Sterling-Whitmore, but as someone learning to see value beyond vintage china and trust funds. I looked at my children, seeing their father's strength and my father's wisdom in their faces. "What do you think?" "Grandfather believed in second chances," Ethan said thoughtfully. "His notes always talked about building bridges, not walls." Through the conference room windows, I could see new employees arriving, their diversity reflecting the company's transformed culture. The algorithm that had once been used solely for profit now powered innovations in medicine, education, and social equity, exactly as my father had intended. "Then let's send her an invitation," I decided. On paper plates. The twins laughed, the sound echoing through halls that had once been closed to them. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't in destroying the old order, but in transforming it into something better, something worthy of the legacy that was stolen and finally reclaimed. As the scholarship recipients began filing in, their faces bright with possibility, I thought about how family trees can be pruned and regrown, how paper plates can become symbols of integrity, and how justice, like my father's brilliant code, always finds a way to express itself in the end.